Hey, it's Stacey of stacey-lee.com, and today I've got a really neat project for you. We're going to be making a vinyl project bag. So the neat thing about my vinyl project bag is we're not doing traditional binding. We're going to be doing self-binding, which is much easier and much quicker. So if this is a project you've been wanting to do but been putting off because you're scared of binding, well, I've got the solution for you. So let me show you how to make this super easy vinyl project bag with my self-binding technique. To make your project bag, you're going to need one piece of fabric for the backing and the binding, and it needs to be 17 inches by 19 inches. We will be cutting it slightly smaller, so it doesn't matter if it's not exactly that size, and it will be the self-binding as well. So what we'll be doing is folding it over, and you will be seeing it on the front. And then for the inside of your project bag, you need a piece of 14 inches by 16 inches. And then we need two pieces that will be up the top, which we will be sewing our zip to. Now, I've used the same fabric as my inside of my project bag. You might like to use different fabric again. Whatever you decide, you need two pieces at 2.5 inches by 16 inches. And then you need a zipper at 16 inches. You're also going to need vinyl, and I've got my vinyl here. Vinyl comes in different thicknesses, or also known as gauges. I personally like this gauge, which is 16. It's nice and thick, but not too thick that it's hard to sew through. And with your vinyl, you're going to need a piece at 14 inches by 14 inches. And then to help make our project bag nice and firm and not all floppy, I'm going to be using Soft and Stable by Annie's, and you could use batting if you prefer, or you can also use Palon Flex Foam. And what we need is a piece that measures 14 inches by 16 inches. And you can find all the cutting instructions in the link in the description below. So the first thing we're going to do is take our two 2.5 inch by 16 inch pieces and press them. So with both of the pieces, I've got the wrong side facing me. I'm going to fold them in half, lining up these edges. So now the right side is facing me, and then I'm going to give that a press. And then I'll repeat for the second piece. So I've got my vinyl here, and it is easier to cut it with the paper behind just to help you see it. Because it is clear, it can be hard to cut. I'll just remove the tissue paper. And then we're going to sew one of our pieces on that we just pressed. It doesn't matter which side we sew it to because it's 14 inches squared. Now I've got the rough edge here, the edge that's cut, and I'm going to line up that edge on an edge on my vinyl, and then the folded edge is away here. So I'm going to line it up on both sides and the edge. Because you can't see the vinyl, it can help to just press the vinyl and the fabric up against your finger to check that it is lined up nicely. And then we'll pop a clip in. We use clips because pins pierce the vinyl. So I'm just going to pop a clip in at that end and then at this end. Just checking everything's lined up by pushing up against my finger, because I find that's the best way to know that it's in the correct position. Because that vinyl is hard to see. Maybe I just need to get my eyes checked. I'll put one in the middle, and then I'll put one in the middle here and here. So now let's just sew along that edge. So just moving this clip down a bit so I can leave it in while I get started. I'm going to stitch with about a 1/4 inch seam allowance. I will do a back stitch so it's nice and secure, and I'm stitching at stitch length 2.5. And I'm using my glide thread. Now you might have a special plastic foot which is for actually using vinyl. So if you are finding it sticky, what you could do is actually get that tissue paper that came with it now and pop it under here so the vinyl isn't sticking to the base of your sewing machine. I actually find it's not really a problem. And when I come to the end, I will just do a back stitch, cut my thread, and then what we're going to do is fold it up. We're going to give it a finger press, fold that up nice and firmly. We don't want to have big creases in there, so really push it up if you didn't do that, you could end up with it looking a bit uneven like that. So we want it really nicely pushed up even, and then we're going to stitch along that again. This time it needs to be smaller than 1/4 inch, otherwise we're not going to catch the vinyl at the back and make it a really nice and tidy top stitch seam. So make it more of a 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. And I'm not going to worry about a back stitch at this time because it really is just more of a top stitch. And then as I am sewing, I will just push the fabric across to make sure I'm not getting any creases in here. So now we're going to attach our zipper. Now I know a lot of people are scared of doing zippers. Trust me, they are super easy, and almost every sewing machine comes with a zipper foot, which just makes them a breeze to put in. So just trust me and give this project a go. So I'm going to take my zipper and I'm facing it right sides up. I'm going to make sure that the zipper is in the middle of my project bag. I don't want these two ends in part of the project bag here. So then I'm just going to place it on top of the zipper. And I'm going to place the edge, the folded edge of my fabric right up and against the zipper, and then I'm just going to pin it in place. We can use pins because this is just fabric now that we're pinning to. So once I'm happy it's in place, I'll pop pins in all the way along. Okay, and like I said, you can see that the little metal bits are both outside of my main piece here. So just check that is the case, because what we're going to do is trim those off. We don't want them as part of our project bag. Now let's just sew along this edge. So I've attached my zipper foot. Now zipper feet can go on either side. My one has a screw and I just slide it across. Yours might have 2 bars and you just clip it to which side of the bar you need it on. So just make sure you're using the right side. You'll soon know because you won't be able to get right up close to this edge here. So we're going to stitch pretty close to the edge of our fabric, about 1/8 of an inch away from that edge there. I will just do a back stitch so it's nice and secure. Coming to the end and just doing a back stitch. I'm trimming my thread. My sewing machine does have a thread cutter. You might need to cut yours. And now let's get that second piece of fabric and attach it to this side of our zipper. So now I'm just going to attach my second piece of fabric to my zipper, and I'm just going to take that folded edge again and line it up with my zipper. And then we're also going to make sure these edges are lined up with the edges that we've already sewn. So we're getting a nice straight line here. And then once we're happy, I will pop some pins in. Okay, and now we're just going to sew along that edge just like we did this edge. So I'm just going to have to move my zipper foot across to the other side. Okay. And now I'll just sew like I did on the other side. Doing a back stitch. And I'll do a back stitch at the end. Cutting my thread, and now we've finished our zipper. Now we have our zipper attached. We will just set this aside and we will trim it a little bit later. So now I have my backing and binding fabric, my inside fabric, and my Soft and Stable by Annie's. And what the Soft and Stable by Annie's is actually a foam, and it really does give our vinyl project bags a really nice sort of solid feel to them. And today I'm going to give this temporary adhesive a try. You don't have to use this, you could just pin yours. I'm just going to give it a quick shake, and then what I'm going to do is just spray a little bit on here. I've never used this before. And then I'm just going to place that in the center of my backing fabric. Now it is a little bit bigger. We will trim it down so it doesn't have to be perfect. Oh, I got a little bit on my desk. And then I will give it another spray. And attach my top fabric. I do want this to line up really nicely because we're not trimming it. This is the final measurements for the inside fabric here with our foam. Now, if you don't have this foam, you could just use regular batting or whatever foam you've got. It's just, this is probably the most ideal product to use for this project if you want your bags to be really nice and sturdy. So once I'm happy that that's all smoothed out and nice and secure, smoothed out on the back also, now what we're going to do is quilt the 3 layers together just to hold it in place, and it sort of is a nice sort of added on visual effect. So you can do as much quilting or as little quilting as you would like. I'm going to start off by drawing a line diagonally from each corner and then just a few extra lines. I'm not going to quilt it a whole lot because remember, the more quilting we do, the longer it does take. So I've just got my chalk pen here. Okay, and just because I've never used that glue before, I am just going to pop a few pins in just on the sides, just to make sure it is staying in place for me. I'm sure you don't need to do this, but I don't know, I'm a little bit nervous about trying that glue for the first time. You could also use your curved basting pins for this. So now all I'll do is quilt that. So for the quilting, because we are doing the self-binding, which means we're folding this over to create the binding, we will on the back see the beginnings and the endings of our quilting. So we want that to be really tidy, and we want to finish right on the edge of our inside fabric here. We don't want to accidentally go past and end up on our backing, because when we fold that over, we will potentially see that. So just be careful to keep your quilting on this inside fabric here, and of course the foam. I don't think I made it very clear that when I did put this inside piece on, I lined it up perfectly with the foam. That's what I meant when I said make sure it's all lined up. So I hope that's clear. Now let's get on to the quilting. So I do have my walking foot on, and that's because we're sewing through lots of layers. If you don't have one, you'll be fine. But what it is useful for is to put your bar guide on to then sew your first line and then use that line to then measure across with your bar guide. If you don't have a bar guide, all you need to do is rule your lines across and follow the lines. So I'm going to start right at the very beginning there. I'll stitch forward a couple of stitches, do a back stitch, and then I'm just going to follow that line that I drew. I will make my stitches a bit larger. I'm going to change that to stitch length 3. Coming to the other corner, being careful not to go off the edge, I will just do another back stitch, trim my thread, and now I'm going to follow along those lines with my bar guide. And like I said, if you don't have one, just rule them, that's perfectly fine. So I've finished quilting now, and I've gone around and I've cut all the thread so it's looking really nice and tidy. Now if I show you the back, you can see that my stitching's really standing out, and that's because I have used white thread. Now if you know me, you know I always use white thread, partially because I'm too lazy to change it. But also because it is cost effective. Now I could have changed the thread to match my fabric so it wouldn't have stood out so much. So that's a personal preference. Change your thread by all means if you don't want to be seeing these stops and starting points as much as you can see on mine. But of course, if you wanted to, you don't have to do the self-binding technique. You could just trim this all off now and bind it traditionally. We're just going to save a whole heap of time by doing the self-binding. And if you can see here, I do have a couple of marks from my glue. Or I'm not sure if that's normal with the 505 spray glue. I'm not very happy. I hope that will sponge out later. So now we need to trim our backing, and it needs to measure 1 inch away from the edge of our inside and our foam here. So what I'll do is I'll take my ruler, I'm going to find the 1 inch mark on it, and I'm going to line that line up on the edge of my inside fabric. Now it is a bit of a ridge, so if I push down now, it kind of flips up because this is so thick. So what I do is I find my 1 inch mark, I line that edge up on the line on my ruler, and then what I do is I do actually push the ruler down so that I can cut a nice straight line. I found that's the best way to do it, because if you just try pressing down, it can be a bit wonky, because we've actually, see there, I can put my finger under there because it is up and raised, seeing as this is so thick. So I'm just going to line it up on the 1 inch mark, push it down, and then trim carefully. Okay, and then I'll just do that on all 4 sides. Now once we've done that, we'll take our top piece that we made earlier, and I'm just going to place it on top and see how close we are to this being exactly the same size as this bottom piece. Not the whole piece, just this inside piece here. And what I've found happens is, depending on how much quilting you do, it actually does shrink just ever so slightly. So if I have a look, you can see here I've got about 1/4 of an inch excess on this side and also down on the bottom. And that's why I recommend not trimming this until you have made this piece here, your backing and your inside. Because once we've quilted and everything, let's measure that, and then we're going to trim this top piece to match it perfectly. So now if I just pop that on top, I can just see I need to trim 1/4 of an inch off one side and 1/4 inch off the bottom. So that's what I'll do. Yours might be different. So what you need to do is just work out how much you do need to trim. And now it doesn't matter if you're just a hair off, you've trimmed it just ever so slightly, but let's try and get it as close as we can to the bottom measurement. So I've got a rotary cutter here with an old blade, so this is what I'm going to use to cut through my zipper and to cut through this vinyl. I don't recommend using your good cutter for this, so if you do need to, if you don't have a cutter that you're comfortable with using, you could always just rule the lines and cut them with your scissors. So I'll just place my ruler on top, and I'm just going to start off by cutting this excess bit of the zipper off. So I'm just going to line up my ruler on the edge of the vinyl and at the edge of my fabric and zipper there, and trim off that excess. And now on this side I need to cut 1/4 inch off, so we'll just spin it around. Now I'm just going to line up the edge so I can cut 1/4 inch off this line here. But what I will do is I will pull my zipper and make sure my zipper is included in it. We don't accidentally want to cut our zipper off. So I'm just going to make sure it's lined up on a line. I can see this edge is also lined up on a line. So it's going to be nice and straight. Okay, and then when you're comfortable, just trim off that excess. And then I also, remember, have to cut off just about 1/4 inch off the bottom there. So let me just make sure this edge of my vinyl is lined up on a line. And then I'll cut off about 1/4 of an inch. Oh, wrong cutter. Okay, there we go. Let's move on to the final step. So now let's do our self-binding. I've found that the best way to do that is to start at the top, and then let's make sure this top piece here with the zipper is sitting really nicely, and then we'll go around and clip the rest or pin the rest. I do find that it kind of does want to wiggle a little bit, so that's why I like to start off with the top, make sure it's looking really nice, and just check that everything's still lined up every now and then as I go along. So all I'm going to do is take this top piece here, that backing, and I'm going to fold it over to meet up with our inside there and press. So I'll just come along and do that. You can give it a finger press. I do find with art gallery fabrics, finger pressing doesn't really help so much. It really does want to be pressed. Okay, so now I've pressed that all down to meet up with the inside. And then what I'm going to do, so we're not going to clip it just yet, we're just going to deal with this corner. I can move this out of the way, but when we get to a corner here, I'm just going to pretend to fold it up. Well, I'm not pretending, I am. And then I'm going to take this piece, which now belongs to this side, and I'm going to fold it on a right angle, so that edge there is now lined up with this side of my inside fabric, if that makes sense. So let's just open that up again. So one more time, what I'm going to do is I'm going to fold this over, and you can see that's looking like our binding now. And then with this edge here, which is now part of this side, I'm going to pick it up and fold it over so this edge lines up with this side of my project bag now. So I'm lifting it up, folding it over so we've got a right angle, and then I'm going to press. So fold that back over. Then what I'm going to do is fold this edge over to meet the inside of our project bag again. So all I'm doing is folding that edge, just like we did this side, except now we've got this folded corner. And we're going to come back and pin it, but I just find by pressing it, it really helps it sit better. So now I'm just going to come along and press that whole edge. Okay, so now I'll line up my top of my project bag with the base of my project bag. I'm going to make sure all these edges are lined up really nicely. Make sure these sides are lined up nicely. And then when I'm happy, I'm going to start folding over, and I'm going to clip. You could also pin if you like, because there's no vinyl here. And then I'll carry on. And you can use as many clips as you'd like. And we're just, now I don't know if you can see that, but my vinyl has just slipped a bit to the left. I'm just going to wiggle it back into place. This is a little bit fiddly, but once you get the knack of it, it really is a really nice quick way to do our binding. Now we're coming back up to our corner. We want our zip to sit really nicely. So what I find the best thing to do here is to open it up, because the pull here kind of pushes it open. Can you see how that's sitting really nicely now? Whereas when it was here, it's trying to push it open. So let's open that right up so it's sitting really nice and flat. And then all we're going to do is fold it back out over how it was. So we're folding that over so it lines up with that edge there, and then folding it in half to meet our edge here. And then we're going to fold that right up and over, creating our binding. And I find it, just tuck this in, just push it right in, and then you'll get a really nice mitered corner. And then once you're happy, clip that. And now we can address this zip here that had tried to creep open. Make sure that's really nicely lined up. You could, of course, just done a few stitches over there to keep it closed at this point, but I find it works fine just to keep an eye on it as we're doing it at this point. So I'm just going to fold over my binding there. I'm going to clip it right on top, and then I'm going to carry on and do all four sides. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that it's all lined up nicely as I go. Now, if you wanted to, you could just sew one side at a time and then carry on. I like to clip all of mine and just sew around at one time. And then I find the most important thing to check when you've finished and you think you're ready to sew is just check that this top piece is sitting really nicely. You might want to take a ruler and measure the distance here and make sure it's the same across the whole way, and then that way it's just going to look really nice and smart, because sometimes it can just shift ever so slightly and then the whole piece is slightly shifted, so your zip will look a bit crooked. So anyway, clip as much as you'd like to. You could do one side or two sides. I'm going to do all four sides and then we will sew. I like to start on a side and we're just going to stitch a top stitch catching just the edge, so about 1/8 of an inch in from the edge of the binding is perfect. Work out the best guide for you. I've got this fancy left compensating foot that I'll use, and I will put a link in the description below if you've got a dookie and want to check it out. And I'm going to stitch at stitch length 2. I won't worry about a back stitch because we'll come back over it. So as I'm sewing, I'm just going to be removing these clips and just making sure I'm happy with the placement of my binding. When I get to the corner, I'm going to sew right up to where I can see the join is, or the seam, and at that point I know to turn, so I'll just make sure my needle is down, lift my foot up and turn, and then I'll carry on. So now I'm back where I started. I'll just go past where I started a couple of stitches and then back stitch a couple of stitches, cut my thread, and then we will just trim that little bit of excess off. Okay, now we are done, but there is just one last little thing you can do if you really want to make it look really perfect and nice. So this is just me being really particular, but you can see it looks a little bit ruffled here, and maybe I could have just sewn it better to not get that. But all I'm going to do to fix that is give it a really careful press, pressing just the fabric and being really careful not to press the vinyl. So I'm just going to put it right up next to it like that. And then I find that just really smooths it out and just gives it the most amazing professional look. I'm not sure if you can see that, but that has resolved my problem really well. So there we have my vinyl project bag. Now you can find the fabric requirements and the cutting instructions over on my website, and I'll put a link in the description below. And that's to make my large size vinyl project bag. I also have a pattern that I sell at a nominal fee, and that offers you 4 different sizes, including one that's a mini size. It's perfect as a pencil case. Now I think they're great for projects, but I also think they'd be awesome for school, for your kids, for their reading books and for their homework. I know my children needed little bags exactly like this for school. So there's lots of ways you could use these bags. They're not just for crafting. Thank you so much for joining me, and I'll see you again next week.